All right, guys, and we're back. AWC TV episode 14. Happy to have Coach Simpson back. We thought we'd take a different approach and have a little roundtable and talk about what it takes to coach at the many levels, at the different levels of the sport. And we'll do kind of a roundtable format. So let's start with lower elementary. What's your take, your feedback on what it takes to coach the little guys, the Bantams, the pre-Bantams, and
really have not done that for a long time. Probably not since I was a high school age kid. So I started coaching really young kids when I was just a kid, and really didn't know what I was doing.
You're starting to break up again. So you break up, I'm going to jump to.
And it was probably there to try to get an appreciation for being. All right, is that better?
Yeah.
Am I still breaking up?
That's better.
All right. So, I mean, had I known better then, I would say that the biggest thing about like the really, really young kids is to try to teach them body awareness. I know, and if we're going to talk philosophically, is predominant in Eastern Europe through the former Soviet bloc countries, is a better system overall as far as like teaching kids to be good athletes. It's not necessarily just wrestling, but it's good athletes. And for the most part, their youth kids just kind of come in and learn body awareness. It's a lot of gymnastics. It's a lot of tumbling and just kind of figuring out how to move their body and not get hurt. And I think we don't necessarily see that enough.
At our level, yeah.
In America, everybody's like, well, go play soccer, go play baseball. Teach them how to move and teach them how to be much. And then, after that, then it's kind of an issue of like, all right, hey, now we can start getting into certain skills. And I think even at that age, you can teach them to be body aware, but teach them really basic concepts and skills to be good athletes. And I know I've seen y'all warm up and I've been into clinic in the room a couple of times. And I know y'all do a lot with that within your warm up, rolling and cartwheels. And, I know you got some kids that can do head springs and stuff like that. And, I think that's great. I think that's the stuff that they need to know and the stuff that they need to do on a regular basis to develop that coordination, just, from the high school room, as far as like coordination and stuff, I span the gamut. I've got kids that can't do a cartwheel, and then I've got kids that can full on go round off to back handspring to back flip, from round off to back flip. And I've got kids that are in my room now that, they can do a stationary, just stand and fire off a back flip. And, it's those kinds of things, I think, particularly in the youth level. Obviously you're not going to have like a 5 or 6 year old doing a standing back flip. But the idea of being able to roll and control their body, for me at least, is a really, really big thing.
And for sure, Tremaine, what's your take? Being a multi.
And I think, watching your room, I think I've seen a bunch of that.
I think we lost video. So Tremaine, I'll let you jump in. So you coach. To jump to Tremaine real quick. So I know, Tremaine, you coach multiple youth sports. I know you guys are very heavily involved in pretty much everything. What's your philosophy for the little ones?
Yeah, I think just piggybacking off what Coach Simpson said, I think the body awareness is definitely critical. Tumbling and gymnastics and all those type of workouts kind of help with the long-term, athletic development. Far as football, I've been pushing a lot of my kids to participate more in speed and agility training. because you find out that a lot of kids just don't know how to run properly. The dynamics with running, jumping, balance, a lot of kids struggle with. And I think if we tackle those type things early on and not focus so much on the competition, I think, the long-term effect will be a lot better for the athlete.
Yeah. Right. And it's, for us, that's the club, it's the Cub room. Nice. We call it the Cubs. And those are the kids that are, the high-level philosophy is we want them to have fun and enjoy being on the mat. Competitions are optional. The fee structure is a little bit different. And it, like Coach Simpson said early on, it takes a special skill set to coach that room. I started out with the Cubs. I started out when Aiden was in kindergarten, just coaching the little ones. And, I certainly had a new appreciation for dealing with kids, but you couldn't teach them the same things that, we learned when we were in high school. And we have moved to that more dynamic warm-up where kids are trying to develop some body control. So, we give them a scale. So if a kid can't do a cartwheel, it's just, hey, put your weight on your hands and move your feet. And we bring the skills down a little bit to the athlete depending on where they're at. And, we have kids now that are trying backflips because they see the kids at high school do it. And it always makes me nervous, but the kids keep challenging themselves when they see others doing it. It's encouraging. And it's kind of, it's an unwritten competition type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do y'all think are like in that age group, what are skills that you feel like those kids need to develop within their first couple of years? So you're looking at like, let's say 5 to 8 year olds. Like, what do you, if a kid comes in and he starts when he's 5 or she starts when she's 5, by the time they hit 8 and they've been on the team for a couple of years, what are the skills you feel like they should have, or I don't want to use the term master, but should be able to do with high proficiency by the time they're 8?
So typically when, for that level, it's positional. So the type of wrestling we're going to teach is positional, and it moves between different positions. We should see them understand and react to different positions, whether it be in the middle of a shot or, coming up off their knees from bottom or, getting off their back. Those are just the kind of basic positional awareness things that we kind of focus on. And, we've developed games for most of those positions to kind of reinforce it. So if I look at someone, I'm moving from, the Cub team to the blue team, that's someone who's is focused. That's a big deal. And understanding some of those different positions, because each level has a different mindset and focus, right? So someone who's more focused and he's picking up on the skills, and maybe he's just kind of pounding everybody in the room because he's just mature and he's picking things up faster. We kind of graduate them along once they get to that point. But focus, that mental maturity, body awareness, those are the ones that typically will move between teams to get the right coaching so that they're developing appropriately. But it's usually like a case-by-case basis. And usually parents are pretty engaged too. We try and keep them engaged in what what little Johnny should be looking for this year for long term.
Yeah. So some of the things that I look for, and it's like, it might just be a personal thing for me, but it's footwork. Footwork is one of those skills that, transcend all sports. So if you get the kids, circling, learn how to circle, learn how, to be effective in the stance and the motion, I think that, that'll benefit them as they, progress through each level. And a lot of that goes, like you said, goes back to, body awareness. So, at that age, you just make it fun for them, have them trying to touch some kids' laces and the other kid moving. And I think that it makes it fun, and kids pick up skills and they don't really realize that they're picking up skills. Yeah.
Yeah. I think those are the reasons dodgeball was part of the drills when I was back in the Cubs. It was stance and motion dodgeball. 2 guys in that little Cub room, and all they're doing is on their feet, just moving side to side on their toes, for that, footwork type deal.
Right. Okay. I like the fact that y'all are talking about games and making it fun. And I think all phases, all age levels and experience and all that, I think at some point in time, even as a coach, even when I would even say, we kind of see this if you look at some of the college programs and you look at the senior level athletes with things like spike ball and handball to warm up and those kinds of things. I think there are always certain games that can be played and things that can be pulled from them, whether it's like Tremaine was talking about with the footwork and the idea of dodgeball, or the footwork with handball and being able to move, and spike ball and stuff like that. How much quote unquote fun time do you put into and it's not necessarily like the really, really young kids, but how much fun time do you put into, let's just say a week? If you're laying out your practice plan for a week, how much time do you put into a week's worth of practice?
I would tell you it varies by age group. For the little ones, we try and end with a game every practice. They're 2 days a week. They'll spend probably the last 10 minutes of practice doing something where they're playing fun time. The blue group, sometimes it depends on the age group. So this year we had a really young blue group. They would go and play probably once a week. The older ones, man, the more advanced ones, our gold team, most of them would rather pick up the weights. They really enjoyed kettlebells and doing those kettlebell workouts. So that, for the most part, became their fun time.
Right.
So the guys seem to really enjoy that. So each group each year is a little bit different. We do play some games and we get them moving. My big thing is slap tag, where they're laying down flat on the mat, and if it's your turn to run, you better run or you're gonna get tagged. The guys have fun with that. That's probably more of like an every other week type deal for the older ones, because they are more focused in that group, and they have goals, and we talk about goal setting and mindset, things like that, so that it's really more kind of as you see it as a coach, you see the kids starting to get burnt out, you change it up and say, okay, we're going to move on. But that group was so focused this year that I don't think it worked much in it at all, really. I don't know, Tremaine, I don't think it was that much at all for the big ones.
Yeah, I think it also depends on the time of year as well. As we get closer to state competition, we try to ramp it up a little bit. But it is important to implement those games in there, because just thinking about my kids, the season can be a grind.
Yeah.
So it's a good way to kind of just have fun and not think about just the act of wrestling. Yeah. So those things are just like, even with all my sports, even with football, we have to break away from the plays, and we might play shirts and tails or whatever, your sharks and minnows on the football field, because you do lose those kids' attention after a while. So I think we do a good job of balancing it and seeing, hey, okay, it's time to pull back and do something a little different.
I like the idea you had earlier in the season. We went to wasn't Pump It Up, but went to that place in Collierville. So instead of a tournament got canceled. Instead of putting on a practice and doing something else, we actually went to a place like Pump It Up as a group and had some team building, had some fun together, and the kids really seemed to enjoy that. And it did break up what's usually the more competitive part of the season, where a lot of the local guys trail off and the guys are looking for states. It's counterproductive to old school thinking, but it made a huge difference for those kids and broke up the season just to give them something fun to go do together as a group. So I thought that was probably another one that we've added in, and I think we'll probably do again next season.
How much do you think you can use those games to teach the kids? I mean, not only do they have fun with them, but and there are certain quote unquote wrestling games that teach skills, like the shoelace game. The idea of footwork, getting your legs back, stuff like that. We have a kind of a game. Well, I don't even call it a game. It's a little competition in our room about getting your hands locked around a guy's leg. So it doesn't matter whether he's a shooter or the shootee or whatever it is, but that idea of not letting a guy get his hands locked around your leg, that's the one rule. And we tell him, like, it doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. Like, there are no other rules. Just if he gets his hands locked around a leg or two legs, he wins. He wins the point, and then the game or the competition's over. How much do you feel like playing games within your practice benefits you and your athletes as far as teaching them how to compete? And not in the sense of wins and losses, but how to game. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, how to compete the whole time and figure out ways to be successful, figure out ways to have an advantage. How much of that do y'all try to impress upon? And I'm sure, like, with the younger kids, it's a little difficult, but like your fifth graders through your eighth graders, like, do y'all ever try to do that with your kids and use those competitions, those little games, to try to teach them about gaming inside of wrestling competitions?
So, we probably don't talk as much about the gaming aspect of it, but the mental part of competing and, accepting a loss, coming off, saying, oh, all right, it's not that big a deal. You get to go back again and have another time. The kids, the way we kind of structured, depending on the game we're playing, the kids just enjoy it. They enjoy competing. And there are some that are just so competitive, they don't want to lose at anything. And some that'll accept it, come back and do something different. So we typically use it as more like a mindset type deal where, hey, you're competing, we're having fun. Competition is supposed to be fun, and it develops them along, subconsciously.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point about competition. When I coach football, every drill, I kind of let the kids know you are competing to do that drill better than the kid in front of you. So it helps raise the standard of the team up. And if you got everybody on the same page, if you probably don't have a successful outing. So I think it's probably good to communicate that probably a little more next year to say, hey, you guys need to try to win. We're just not out here just, we're playing for fun, but have a little bit of competitive nature in you.
I mean, me personally, and in the high school, we try to make them compete everything. One of the fundamental pieces to our program is AWC, always be competing. And so it doesn't really matter what it is. It's, the first one to get in the room to start pulling out mats, or it's the first one in line to get checked in for weights, or, even in the weight room, or, when they're conditioning and stuff, it's, who can lift more here. And it doesn't matter if it's across the whole group or just within their own lifting groups, or maybe it's just a partner that they have that they're chasing down, or they're trying to stay ahead of, or all that other kind of stuff. I think the more and more you put the kids in competitive situations, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you put pressure on them, and it's not like that, but in those little competitions, at least to me and in my experience, it kind of teaches them how to compete, how to find those advantages that aren't, that don't have to be told to them by a coach. That idea of, if I'm lifting last, then I know what I have to beat. So it's a little bit easier for me to kind of counteract this. So if I'm the last one to lift, and I already know that my partner's lifted 150 pounds, then me saying, all right, well, I'm going to lift 155 pounds, that becomes an easy mark to set, because I just have to go, just above that. So the idea of, like, okay, we're 10 seconds away from the end of the match. The score's even. If I take the shot here and I get the takedown, I get the win. As opposed to mixing them up sometimes and making them lift in a different order. And now you got to lift first. So now where do you set the bar? Can you set that bar and keep it protected? Can you do enough work to protect that, so that in that kind of same example, like, instead of being tied, now I'm up by 2 with 10 seconds left. Can I protect my lead? And then there's ideas of, like, teaching them, I guess it'd be inadvertently, how to compete and how to keep those edges sharp for when they compete and doing things like that? Do y'all ever kind of talk about that within your practices? I mean, I'm sure, again, the young kids, it's a little bit different, but with like your middle school kids and stuff like that, do you ever talk about those kinds of things?
To some extent. I think for the middle school and the gold, what we call the gold group, has historically been the middle school group. This was the first year we've had kids as young as second grade in that group. And it just speaks volumes to where some of those kids were at mentally. They were all pretty focused, and the competition piece of it. You think about Tyrez, Gabe, Bruce, other Gabe. Insert a few other names. I mean, all of those kids, Nate. I mean, they just wouldn't give each other an inch. Even the drilling. So we had to level set. Okay, this is the time you guys should be working on details versus not trying to give it to them and give up a piece. But we do spend a little bit of time talking about different scenarios and things to look for, and the kids absorb a little bit of it, not too much. But we spent a lot of time over the years with the out of bounds change, understanding what's out of bounds and what's not has paid off for us completely. Those little details, a lot of the more mature ones will pick up. Definitely not to the extent that you guys would go through it.
Yeah, I have, unfortunately and fortunately, I have a house full of ultra competitive kids. They hate to lose, and it's almost like a gift and a curse. It's just like, dude, just take the loss. But even my daughter, like, she goes in the weight room with you and like, hey, I got to make sure these girls are not catching me.
Oh yeah.
But you just have different kids, pick up that competitiveness at different times. But I just think it's important to bring it out of them as early as possible. Just don't be happy to make it to the final stage, to the finals. Try to get out there and win. So creating those different scenarios in practice, I think Chris does a good job of creating, hey, you're down by 2 with 30 seconds to go, and letting them wrestle live. It kind of brings it out in competition.
Yeah. I will tell you, we do dial it back, though, when they get into the weight room. We don't pick up the bars. We spend all our time with kettlebells, developing some functional movements. They do have that competitiveness. They'll look across the room and see so-and-so picking up a kettlebell. Like, oh, I'm going to lift that one too. I want to outdo him. There's some you have to reel in. That's the place where it's like, okay, hold on, time out. If you can't lift the 8-pound one over your head, you're not picking up the 25. It's just not going to work out. You have to have form, and I know some of them have some level of training that can do that. I know who can and who can't. That's probably the one place we dial it back and say, look, it doesn't matter what you're lifting. You've got the right weight for you. Try and do more rounds than the other guy. So
right.
That's where we kind of dial it in a little bit, but you still give them some level of competition.
But and even that extent of like, hey, I struggle to pick up the 8-pound dumbbell over my head, but now I'm going to go out here and try to, or I'm at least going to grab the 25 and I'm not going to be left behind. Do you think that fosters that idea of, so everybody knows that you have competitors that they're winners. Like, that's what people say, is that they just know how to win. It just seems like every time they compete, they can figure out how to be successful, how to pick up that W. And at least for me, I look at it and go, well, they figured that out through multiple repetitions of competing in different scenarios. Right. I think if you're in practice and you're always beating up on kids and you're beating up on the same kids and you're in a drill where you're down by 2, you really don't get that experience of having to go out there and get it, because you already know I'm going to get it. Because you get it every day because you beat the kid up every day. But for me, I look at it and go, a kid that's kind of like that, and I think it's a little bit of an extreme example, but a kid that's looking to make that jump in the challenge then becomes one of those kids that you can look at and say, here's a kid that wants to be the winner. How do we teach him how to be the winner? So maybe you take that 25-pound kettlebell and you put it back on the rack, but you definitely put a 12 or a 10 in his hand and say, all right, let's see if you can't do this. And at least for me, particularly on the high school level, we try to do that a lot. And I think the weight room is a great place to learn those kinds of things. At least from my experience, I can teach them a lot about competition in the weight room where we're not having to be on a mat. I don't have to go out and find a tournament every weekend in the off season to give them opportunities to learn how to compete. And I also think it also teaches them how to fail and fail correctly, or as we call it in our program, fail forward. So, I mean, 200 pounds is 200 pounds in the weight room. Like there's no discrepancy in it. Like, you know, it's simple addition. You can either lift the 200 pounds or you can't lift the 200 pounds. So we have kids that attempt weights that they fail at the repetition. And at least within our program, teaching kids how to fail correctly and fail forward is, at least in this particular day and age, is very, very difficult. At least I have found.
Yeah.
I find that it's a lot harder to teach them the same lesson of failing forward now that I tried to when I started coaching a long time ago. And I have noticed that a lot of the kids that come out of our youth program, particularly the past couple of years, I'd say probably in the past 5 years, and a great example of a group that was good at failing forward was with Caleb Morgan and Luke Kearns. I look at both of those guys, and they had a lot of success in their careers, but they also dropped matches that they were in, and they were in the hunt. And so how do you teach them how to do better there from a competitive aspect? And I can only imagine what it's like in the youth, but I'd kind of like to hear y'all's philosophy on how do you teach those youth kids how to, you know, because it is tough, particularly because you got so many different age groups and maturity levels and skill sets. How do you teach those kids how to fail forward and bounce back from maybe not being successful in the places that they want to be?
Yeah. So I will tell you one of the things we talk about, and we're going to spend more time talking about this this season. I've already made the addition to their goal sheets. Is what's the next best thing? You know, when you watch, you know, I've had more time to catch up on my flow films. When you watch some of these guys that, you know, Fila did wrong in the past, or, you know, different scenarios put these guys in a disadvantage. And you think about guys competing at that world level, and the head coach's feedback is always, okay, next best thing. You didn't get what you want, you know, but let's go get that next best thing. And each one, I think all of us kind of do a good job of you know, separating and talking to kids and giving them, hey, here's just a couple things that you do differently. And, you know, walking off the mat when you're upset, you're required to stand there and talk to your coach. You're going to handle it like, you know, a man or a woman, and you're going to accept some feedback, or at least you're going to hear it. And these are some things we make adjustments, and then we bring those adjustments into the room, you know, and each coach has their own group that they kind of work better with. Some like me, some like Coach Tremaine, some like Coach Matt, and we tell them it's fine. You pick the coach you want in your corner, but you got to take the feedback and you got to make the adjustments. And when we work on those in practice, we do see results. And it's, especially this past season, you look at, you know, a regional tournament, we had a lot of guys that didn't just beat a guy they lost to before, they were pinning them. And when they see that type of success, they buy in, they listen. So we saw a lot of that this year. I mean, I've got a bunch of examples, Tremaine, but I don't want to call a bunch of them out.
Yeah, no, we got some kids who haven't been experiencing a lot of success. You know, I guess they're probably middle schoolers, but you know what I like is that they come out each week, work hard in every practice, and you know, I just tell them, hey, you know, just try to get 1% better. You know, I know that's a cliche term, you know, getting 1% better, but over a time period, you know, you will see some success from it. But like Chris was saying, you know, the communication after a match, you know, giving them constructive criticism on some things that they can improve on, and just telling them, hey, just trust the process. You know, this is a sport that I don't know many people that just come in and win them all. I tell my kids that this is not football. It's not track, not basketball. You know, you have to earn every win. And sometimes there's just some kids out there that's, you know, a lot better than you. But, you know, how you respond is what really makes a champion. Because, you know, you got another match behind you. You know, you can't dwell on that loss. Just keep working on the things that you're kind of weak on. So I think they do a pretty good job of it. Yeah.
And it's giving them positives too. So, you know, as you were talking, there was 3 very specific middle schoolers that were in their second year. They had very tough first years. It's tough to come out as a first year in middle school and be competitive. And these guys, they tried. They struggled. They ended their season appropriately a little bit early, came back hungry. They developed so far in 2 years just with their mental focus. And you'd see, you know, some ups and downs in tournament performance, depending on where they were at. They made huge strides. And that's one of the things we anchored on with them is, hey, look, you're a second-year guy, and you lost by 2 points. A guy's been doing this for 7 years. You know, there's a lot that you did right, and there's a lot that's going to get better as you stick with it. And the conversations usually they're individual specific, but we just don't let guys come off the mat and run and throw their headgear and pout in the corner. That's just not who we are. I think that's a big part of it.
And I think both of you bring up really good points. And like Tremaine was saying, you know, the 1%, we have a rule in our room that every day you come in to work out, it doesn't matter whether we're just lifting or we're running or we're wrestling or whatever we're doing, yoga or whatever it is. We kind of put it to our kids, you know, you're responsible for getting at least 1% better today. Now, we don't hamstring them by telling them, like, you got to get 1% better at this or anything like that. It's just overall 1% better. And I think some of our kids struggle with that because they have the good days where they get a lot better. So they'll get, you know, 5% better. And then they have other days where they struggle, where they come in and they're like, there's nothing I did right, you know? And it's like, well, okay, did you stand in there and fight? You know, that's becoming more mentally tough. Were you trying to make the adjustments? They just weren't clicking for you. Then, you know, you're seeing things within your competitions or your live goes or your drills or whatever it is, that you're going, this is not working. And I know it's not working, but, you know, I can't fix it because I don't know, or whatever it is. You know, you're building up some mental toughness. You're building up some wrestling knowledge. That's an improvement upon where you were when you walked in the door. And I think for a lot of kids, and I don't think it matters what level they're on, even all the way up through college, sometimes it's really hard for them to understand that, like, 1% better, even if you did the bare minimum, you were 1% better. I mean, our season's roughly about 100 days. I tell our kids, like, if you got 1% better, if you did the bare minimum every single day you stepped in, then you're 100% better at the end of the season than you were at the beginning of the season. And I said, you know, if you're really good, if you're a good kid and you get 100% better by the end of the year, like, you got to be really, really good then. And I think they fail to see. I mean, we were all young, and if it's not almost instant gratification, sometimes it's really hard to understand. I think they find it hard to understand that drop in the bucket, that those add up. You know, that 1% is very minuscule in the moment, but over time it becomes a big, big thing. And I think what you were talking about, Chris, about the you know, we give them positive and constructive criticism. Coach Dawson and I refer to it as the coach's sandwich. You know, you start with something good, and then you put in, you kind of slide in that, like, well, you didn't do this right, or maybe you didn't get to this, or maybe you gave up too easy in this position, or whatever your constructive criticism is, and then you always finish on a good note. Whether that's like, hey, you're still in the tournament, and we got to battle back for third, or it's one of those things where you look at it and go, hey, you know, we appreciate you fighting hard, not giving up, you know, the full allotment of bonus for the dual meet, or, you know, whatever it is. But making sure the kids understand that, you know, even if they didn't get what they wanted to, they didn't get a W in that case, there's still good things that come out of it. And I think that's really important, you know, as far as like failing forward and things like that. I think it's really important for them to understand that, you know, there's good things that can come out of that. You know, you may lose to it. And we've had this a lot, and I know y'all deal with it too, because you were talking about, you know, beating kids later on in the season where they'll lose to a kid early on in their career or early on in the season, or maybe they lose to the same kid, multiple times in youth, and they get to us in high school, and then they kind of tell Coach Sossaman, or they tell Coach, they never bother to tell me, but they'll tell a coach, like, I've never beaten this guy. He always beats me. And they do a really good job of looking at them and going, you're not going to lose that kid anymore. Like, you may have lost him in the past, but like, you're going to beat that kid. We're here to help you beat that kid. Coach Nettleton and Coach Tremaine, they gave you a great base, and Coach Matt has given you a good base, and whoever's worked with them, they gave you a really good base, and maybe you haven't caught them yet, but we're going to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure that you get there and you catch that kid and you end up beating them. And we've had a bunch of kids. I mean, I could rattle off names for the next 30 minutes of kids we've done that with. But I think that's also a big deal is making sure they understand that they're making strides, even if they're small, in climbing up that ladder and closing that gap down to get to those kids.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that has to do with it. If they can fail forward, they can catch those kids and they can beat those kids. But if they resist that idea of failing forward, then, you're going to continue to lose that kid for the rest of your career. You're never going to beat them.
Yeah.
Because in your head, you'll never beat them.
And
you bring up a good point about the coach's sandwich.
Yeah.
I could speak on my own experience with Tyrez in the match. So he comes off the mat after a tough match, and instead of me, reinforcing what good things he did in the match, it was hard criticism. And he said, "Dad, you didn't even tell me I did a good job. You just went right into it." And at that point, I kind of learned, hey, you need to kind of adjust your criticism style a little bit, because they're still 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds. They need that affirmation of, hey, what did I do well? And then you can sandwich some of the other stuff in there, and it's doesn't seem as harsh. So I like the way you brought up that point about how you approach the sandwich.
Yeah, it's definitely good. It reminded me too of it was Aiden in his 8th grade year. He lost to the same kid 5 times in a row that season. Always saw him every tournament. But the mindset we talked about with him is you're getting closer. You got tech fall the first time, then you lost by major, then you brought it close, then you brought it within 2, then you're winning and you made a mistake. And it went on, and then he sees the kid in the regional tournament, ends up beating him 15-5. And it's not just for him; it was a huge deal for him. He's never lost that kid again. He's seen him a couple times at the high school level, and it wasn't even close. But I use that example for kids, and we probably talk about it a couple times each season. It's incremental growth. Okay, you didn't get your W, the coach's sandwich. I like the term. But you could take that. Okay, you lost by 8. Next time you lose by 4. You're closing the gap. We talk about different things. What can you do to work on in the practice room to close the gap? Because we're very fortunate that 99% of our kids have a bunch of different matchups in the practice room that they can go work on that stuff with. That can give them different looks. That's been a big deal for so many kids over the years. Just that mindset of incremental growth is huge.
Absolutely. So, all right. So here's a question for you. What are the things you guys feel like, and I know you guys work with different age groups. So coming up, what are the things that you feel like your kids need to know to progress to the next level? So the idea of like youth age to middle school to high school. Like what are the things that when a kid leaves, a kid that you're coaching leaves you and moves on to the next level, do you feel like I have to impart these things to this kid? He has to know either these pieces of technique or these certain mental pieces or whatever it is. So if you could just basically fill a box and say, all right, once this box is full with these things, like you're ready to make that next step. What do you feel like those things are?
Besides the moves, And anybody could sit and drill a perfect move against a practice dummy. It's the positional awareness. So as I'm sending a kid up into different groups, I expect them to know how to drill, to know how to be a good partner. So I'm going to get in a situation, and I'm not going to give them what we call the old school trophy stance with, the 2 arms up and 2 feet together, just kind of standing there like that. So how do I be a good partner and help a teammate develop? That to me is being a part of a team. And we talk about wrestlers, you compete as individuals, but there's an entire team behind you that took you there, that got you there. You practice as a team. Your teammates help you get better. So there's kind of a give and take in practice that you help your teammates get better. That is what helps me bring kids along. That's probably one of the biggest. The mental toughness and the mindset piece is another one that and it's tough for everybody. Tougher for some than others, but you have to understand how to get focused, and how do I get my head screwed on right so I can go out there and compete at the high level. I mean, when you see kids, especially the last few years, that have really, really wanted to go get a piece of tough matches. They didn't care win or lose. I mean, that to me is a big deal. And they're going out there and they're wrestling out of different positions. That that tells us, hey, we're moving in the right direction. If we have kids that go out there that are, they're losing matches and they're throwing their headgear and they're the ones, throwing these big temper tantrums, and then we're doing something wrong. And we have a bunch of kids doing that. There's always gonna be a few. But there's some, hey, you need to pull them aside and make sure that the mindset is right. And sometimes it involves maybe having a conversation with the parents, say, hey, here's some of the things that we do. Here's some of the things that we talk about. And we've actually, I will tell you, over the years, we've opened up a little bit and given them, here's some of the things we talked about at practice. Here's some of the things that we told your kid, or even putting it in the app, as far as, hey, here's some of the conversations we have. And here's some of the things that we talk about. Probably the most common one is, every year we say, instead of using the term, are you ready? It's, you're ready. Trying to instill some confidence. Hey, you're ready. You're going to go out there and score some points. It's a game of points. Focus on, getting your points, as opposed to go get a pin. It's, hey, just work on scoring your points. Just get these incremental little wins. And then that slowly builds that competitiveness, that confidence, and that drive to be on the mat and develop into something better.
Yeah, for me, a lot of stuff that Chris talked about, but I'm really big on the mental piece.
Yeah.
And just speaking for my kids alone, and you talk about moving on to different levels. I would hope by the time they left the wrestling room that they would one, have the right work ethic. You know what I mean? Come in ready to work all the time. Know how to carry themselves, on the mat during a loss, or winning. Then how, teaching them how to respond to adversity. A lot of those intangible things. I think, Chris hit on drilling, how to drill properly, how to be a good partner, how to be a good teammate. I think all those things help prepare the wrestler for the next level. The moves are good, but like I tell my kids, there's always another level. You think you mastered it, there's always another level. So you got to be willing to absorb that knowledge and be a student of the sport, or whatever sport you're in, which is kind of hard to do because kids just want to jump on Fortnite. They like to compete. After that, they're like, hey, where's Fortnite? But a lot of those intangible things, I think, helps prepare the wrestler or any sport for the next level.
For sure. Yeah. We're running short on time, but Coach, what are some of the biggest things you want to see from a wrestler that's coming from middle school to high school? What are the things that you look for as most important to you?
We concentrate on a lot of the basics, and the basics are really, really big for us. You win and lose matches based upon your basics. If you can maintain a stance, and a good stance, you're not getting taken down. Therefore, you can't give up the takedown. You can't lose. And we kind of talk to the kids about that a whole lot, in the sense of, like, if you can master the basics, which we try to talk to him about how good, some of these guys are, like JB and Dake and Snyder and stuff. And the sense of like, their basics are so good. Why is it so hard to score on Kyle Dake? Because his stance is freaking phenomenal. Like, you can't get him out of his stance. Like, if you can't get him out of his stance, you can't score on him. I know he does all these crazy things, and he's got these crazy, pieces of his defense and his chest wrap and all that other stuff. But I mean, how often do you really see a guy get to Dake's leg? I think if you go back and you watch his world championship run where he didn't let anybody score a single point on him, I think the bigger statistic I would want to know is how many guys actually touched his leg. And for me, that's a big thing, because if you can't touch his leg, you can't take him down. Why does Jordan Burroughs score so many points with his double leg? Well, I mean, if you look at his position, in the handful of times photographers get snapshots of him, and you can just see that one picture, that millisecond frozen in time. Like, look at his position. Like, where is his body? He's always in a really, really good position. So I think, at least for me, I want to see physically, I want to see a good understanding or maybe knowledge of the basics. Like, I need to have my head here. I need to have my back straight. I need to have my hips underneath. I need to be in a power position all the time. Yeah. And then also with that is, if I'm not in a good position, how do I get back to a good position? Do I need to bring my knees up here, or do I need to find an angle so that I can get my head up and get my chest up, those kinds of things? It's not really about a number of moves, and I'm not really like, you got to know 20 million moves kind of coach. And that was one of the things that I was going to ask the two of you, philosophically, as a coach. Do you feel like it's better to teach, even, and regardless of the level, whether it's like the club kid or the Cub kids or the blue team or the gold team, is it better to teach moves, or is it better to teach kids how to wrestle out of positions? And what I mean by that is, obviously kids you have to teach them moves. I totally understand that. Like, you got to teach them a high crotch. You got to teach them an outside single. You have to teach them a wrist and a half, those kinds of things. But for you as a coach, is it more important to teach a number of different moves so your kid moving on knows 200 moves? Or is it more important for your kids to understand how to move through positions to get to a more beneficial position for them?
Yep. I would tell you the latter, the more beneficial position. And that's something, we've evolved over the years. Our practice plan has evolved to have, it could be 5 different options from the middle of a shot, a specific shot. And depending on the group and the level of focus and where they're at, we might only get to 3. And we jump around a lot the first couple of weeks. The practice plan is really 3 parts. Is how do I get them ready for that preseason competition? What are the things that they need to know from this position and that position? And at the first couple of weeks, the kids are like, what are we doing now? So we jump around so much. But they go out there and they have a good showing at the preseason, and that gives them some level of confidence. And then you have the mid-season where we're basically focusing on, how do I get ready for, our tournament towards the end of December? And then how do I close out with the local championships in January? And then you have that last phase, which is, working towards the state tournament. And the finishes and things we do will vary, depend on the group. This year the kids really like to, spend a lot of time, working chicken wings and bars. And, this group, I think we got to 6 different steps from the middle of that position, depending on what their opponent did. But it was spending the time at the detail. If he does this, these are some of the things you look for. That stuff really paid off for our guys. And that's the reason why, in my opinion, that we came up on top to close out the season.
Yeah. I'll add, we used to have the saying in the Navy, it's basically be brilliant on the basics,
Yeah.
And a lot of that stuff that you're talking about with stance and motion, knowing where to be positionally in the long run will pay more dividends than doing a fancy move. I think we went to a wrestling camp probably about 3 years ago, and John Smith talked about he would start a practice with just an hour of stance and motion. He was real big on, I care more about, how you hold your stance and stay in your stance than going out there doing a fancy move. So I think every once in a while we have to kind of backpedal and go back to, the basics. Kids get a little sloppy, this, that, and the other, and we have to kind of backtrack and say, hey, we need to go back and review this move because we don't want to give up a point for just being sloppy in our
Right.
So, so like piggyback off Chris, yeah, definitely the latter is kind of our philosophy. I know when I wrestled, I could barely remember anything. so it was just the basic moves that I had that, gave me semi success. If I tried to get too funky with it, it got ugly for me quick.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fine balance. I think when you have, especially little kids with short attention spans, if we spend an hour on stance and motion, I'd lose kids. They get bored and they start looking around. Changing it up, even if they're slightly lost or maybe even a little confused, they're still picking up some level of detail, and they're engaged because you have to pay attention, or especially at the gold group, you have to pay attention, or you're going to be missing what's going on. Last thing I want to hear is every time we break, what are we doing again? I'm like, maybe you're not in the right group. And we balance kids out based on where they're, what's appropriate for them. But yeah, the fine balance of detail and basics is tough and challenging every year because it is different. I mean, our focus in our age groups, they change every year. So, I'm not going to have, super focused kids. Like Hunter's been for the past couple of years. There's going to be times where I have kids that are a little less focused or have a different drive or have something else they're looking for. So it's ever evolving for sure.
Absolutely, and I think different kids, kind of need different things, and I think we're all in agreement with the idea of it's better to be able to wrestle out of multiple positions than it is to know the 200 moves. I just know that there's some coaches that are like, no, we've got to my kids have to know this, and then they have to know this high crotch finish, and they have to know this setup. And I know for me and my experiences with talking with high level college coaches and those kinds of guys that, inevitably the philosophical conversation turns into that idea of, is it better to know a lot of these high level moves, or is it truly better to be able to wrestle out of a multitude of positions, just in the sense of I may not know a specific move from this position, but I know hey, my head's down and my rear end is up, and that's not a good place to be. So I need to just basically move in any way, shape, form, or fashion I can, so that I can get my head up at least in level or line with my backside, so that I've improved my position somewhat, and then we can continue to move from there in hopes that I get my head up, I get my hips underneath me, and then I can look to try to finish in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So, but very interesting. I like kind of how y'all talked about the different groups, and I agree with you. It's very challenging with different skill levels. So.
Yeah, I should unmute myself before I start talking. I mean, honestly, I wish that we could have 4 groups, and we've been very lucky and blessed to have as many assistant coaches as we have that can run different groups, and each philosophy kind of builds into the other. So the Cubs are learning a very small portion of what the gold group is spending, multiple steps on. The blue kind of bridges that gap. And each group is designed to kind of feed into the other, so that the terminology and at least the foundational stuff is somewhat similar.
Yeah, I think the idea of stacking that is massively important. and particularly in a program that covers as many age groups and ability levels as your youth club does, I think stacking becomes I'll say this: if you want to be successful, if you want your club team to be successful and continue to be successful over a long period of time, I think it's really, really important that you have that stacking in there and that you have a plan as to how to teach that stacking. I think that becomes really, really important too. And I think you'll do an amazing job of that. And the times that I've come in the room and been able to see it firsthand, you know, a lot of times I'll come in the room just to kind of catch up with you and shoot the breeze for 5 minutes and just say, hey, this is what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And I end up staying for 25, 30 minutes watching your practice go on and thinking to myself, like, how can I take some of these stacking things that they're doing with their kids and apply them to our program with our kids that are brand new or maybe new-ish to the sport, and all the way up to when they would be, you know, kids with a lot of experience or elite level kids that are not only going to start for us, but we kind of expect to produce on a regular basis.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this has been a great conversation. I know you guys have a hard stop. Any final thoughts on developing wrestlers?
You want to start with that one, Tremaine? I'll let you go first on that one.
You know, it's just, I don't have a bunch of thoughts, but, you know, it's just rewarding, you know, seeing these kids. I think we talked about it before.
Yeah.
Grow in the sport. And, you know, I think what we do in the long-term athletic development is important that we keep the kids in the sport, because we know that 90% of kids drop out of youth sports by the time they're 13 years old. So some of those philosophies with teaching kids how to tumble, implementing games, I think all that is important, that, you know, in the longevity of the sport, so that kids, you know, not that they're burnt out, but for some odd reason, they just don't have a love for the sport by the time they're in high school. So if we have that kind of philosophy, I think in the long term, it'll just benefit the sport even more.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree with that. And I like what you said about, you know, keeping the kids in the sport. And I think if we're realistic with everybody and realistic with ourselves, our sport's not for everybody. And I don't think any sport is for every single person. I think there are certain aspects of the sport you can teach kids to love and to like and to find enjoyment in. And that's a big thing, particularly as far as my idea of development. It takes time. You know, you can't just develop somebody overnight. It just doesn't happen. You have to have that time. And they have to be willing to come in and focus during that time. So it becomes, you know, what do you want to do? You know, what is your goal? And then let's work to your goal. That to me is the development. I'm going to develop you towards your goal, whatever your goal is, whether it's to, you know, win a JV tournament, be a starter, be a region champ or a state champ. You know, or for some kids, it's just, hey, coach, I want to be able to make the starting lineup or whatever it is. You know, that development, you know, it takes time. And it can be a long process. And for some kids, they put in the time, they put in the effort, they stay focused, their intensity is really good, and they see results pretty quickly. And then other kids, you know, you're having to look at them and go, you know, we're having to do a whole lot of development just to get you competitive. Now that you're competitive, we're going to have to do some work to get you to be successful. And it just takes time. So I think, you know, Tremaine's right. Like, if you're not keeping those kids interested, you're not giving them something or not being able to show them something within the sport that they like, you're going to lose those kids before you get the chance to develop them and to allow them to have some sort of success, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said early on at the beginning. We talk about, you know, a lot of those former Soviet Union countries, and, you know, they don't compete right away. And that's, you know, there's very few beginners tournaments. So, you know, one of our issues, and it's not just an Arlington issue, it's an issue locally, is you put these first year kids out into a regular tournament, and you put them in as a beginner, and they get dropped into an advanced bracket. They go out there and get their head handed to them. They are very highly likely not going to come back. Probably won't even finish the season. And that's one of the things that just, in general, why I asked for a youth coaches meeting at the high school scheduling meetings. That's something we need to talk about collectively. If we want the sport to grow, we have to keep kids coming in. There's going to be kids that realize it's just not for them, and there's nothing you can do about that. But there are kids on the fringe that we lose because we drop them into a tournament as a beginner, and they go get their hair handed to them. There needs to be more opportunities for beginners, or a philosophy of, hey, don't compete your first year. Take that year off. And it's very, it's entrenched in the American culture that you compete. You got competitive baseball, you got competitive football, you got competitive everything right now that, everybody wants to take a picture and put it up on social media of little Johnny winning a tournament or winning a match or scoring some points. But those are some of the things that, we try and emphasize in our parent meetings. Hey, look, you don't have to compete. I put tournaments out there on a schedule. I don't want you to go to all of them. I'm just giving you opportunities. We have a summer program. Summer program is fun. Come out, don't come out. It's not a big deal. We're going to be here. We're going to have something going on. We're going to put stuff on, whatever you guys want to do, and we'll put your kids in what we think is appropriate for their development. But it's collectively, like I said, there's still things we got to do better, and that's making sure we're bringing kids in, giving them some level of experience, celebrating incremental wins, small stuff. Scored my first point, got my first win, got my first pin. Those are all things that coaches and parents can do better to keep kids coming into the sport.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I mean, I think there's a time to compete, but if you don't have the skills to be able to compete and you don't understand about the competition, as a first-year kid, I can only imagine how crazy it is for them to go out and go, I didn't know he scored points there. I didn't know I had to shake hands. I didn't know I had to put my anklet on. How do you expect those kids to be able to truly compete when they don't even know what they're doing?
Yep.
And so I think that's a really good point you make about the waiting until later on to compete. I think that's kind of important, and I agree with you. Within the culture we live in now, it's hurry up and get to a competition so that you can get a trophy, and so mommy and dad can post something on social media. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing to not to be proud of your kid, and I think that's really, really important. And I think for a lot of kids, seeing those kinds of things, they're like, hey, my mom and dad were really proud. But I think you have to look at the development of the kid and where they are and say, is this really viable right now? And I think competing very, very early on, either in your experience level or as an age, I agree with you. I think for a lot of kids, it drives them away because they just don't know. They don't know how to compete. And like you said, they go out there and they get waxed real quick. And it's like, I don't like this. It's not fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of changed my whole philosophy on that competition for kids early on. I like the idea of the competition camps because nobody gets a trophy. They get opportunity to wrestle. Plenty of kids, and they don't walk away feeling like, hey, I didn't win anything. They realize that, hey, I went to this camp and got better, against some kids, from all over the, local area or, the country. So I think we put way too much emphasis, and I think this is all youth sports, on the competition, and that kind of hinders a lot of long-term development for the kid. A lot of psychological fear and all that other stuff goes into play with those competition. Yeah.
I will tell you that the biggest learning experience I've had, especially most recently, was the sand wrestling tournament. So when we did that sand wrestling tournament last September, something, hey, we're going to put it on, and we just said, hey, no shoes, no shirt, no worries, or something like that. We set up the rings, we set up a referee, we set up round robin brackets. There was no trophy, there's no gold medal, there's no coaching. There were coaches there, but everybody was kind of off to the side. Guys had a blast. The feedback I got from that was so overwhelmingly positive that I was going to try and do 2 this year, one in the spring, one in the fall. But the kids loved it. And you had kids from different teams just so relaxed, hanging out in the sand, playing games when they weren't up. That was a pretty awesome experience. And I would expect, when the world settles down again, that event will grow. So that was kind of the aha for me, is just when the kids have fun and they can take a step back from, they can compete without, being overly competitive. They had a blast. It was fun to see a lot of those guys from, multiple schools that compete all year round come out and just have fun together. Guys, I definitely appreciate you guys coming on. Episode 14, that's a wrap. We'll catch up with you guys soon.
All right.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Have a good one, guys.